Do you really need a smartwatch? One friend constantly checks their wrist for heart rate alerts and message notifications, while another refuses to wear anything more advanced than a simple analog watch. Between health tracking, sleep scores, and fall detection on one side, and privacy worries, notification fatigue, and high prices on the other, opinions are sharply divided. Are smartwatches becoming essential health infrastructure, or are they just expensive gadgets we can live perfectly well without? In this video, we run a 10-round, 20-turn debate where both sides argue on equal footing using real data and concrete examples. Which side are you closer to? Let us know what you think in the comments. Now, let's dive into the debate.
From a medical and health perspective, I believe smartwatches are in the process of becoming a kind of essential infrastructure. Meta-analyses show that the Apple Watch's ECG function detects atrial fibrillation with sensitivity and specificity of around 95%, making it possible to screen for arrhythmias in everyday life. In the Apple Heart Study, which included over 400,000 participants, the proportion of people who actually had atrial fibrillation confirmed on patch ECG after receiving a notification was quite high, while false alarms were kept to about 0.5%. A system that can pick up arrhythmias that would previously have been missed is no longer just a gadget, in my view.
I don't deny that its arrhythmia detection is accurate, but that simply means it is useful for certain high-risk groups. That is a different question from whether it is necessary for the general population. Atrial fibrillation is common among older adults and patients with specific conditions, but rare among younger people. So there is little rationale for making everyone undergo continuous screening. There are also reports of people becoming overly sensitive to minor ECG or pulse fluctuations and having their anxiety amplified. If alerts increase without proper involvement of medical professionals, we cannot ignore the risk of unnecessary clinic visits and tests.
However, in terms of physical activity, almost everyone benefits. A study that pooled 39 meta-analyses found that using wearables led to an increase of about 1,800 steps per day, roughly 40 more minutes of walking, and an average weight loss of around 1 kilogram. Increases in step count are linked to reductions in all-cause mortality and cardiovascular events. So if changes on this scale occur at the population level, the public health impact is substantial. As a constant feedback device for behavior change, smartwatches are beginning to play a role that is practically close to essential.
That meta-analysis reports only a moderate effect size, and we should not ignore the fact that similar effects can be obtained with inexpensive pedometers or simple health apps. Even if people walk 1,800 extra steps a day, the benefit vanishes as soon as they get bored and stop wearing the device. And in reality, many users give up after a few months. What is truly needed is motivation and an enabling environment, not an expensive smartwatch itself. With ordinary habits like daily walking and regular checkups, most people can achieve their health goals.
Modern smartwatches are no longer just pedometers. They've evolved into early warning platforms for multiple conditions. In addition to atrial fibrillation detection, the Apple Watch has an FDA-cleared feature that estimates hypertension risk from 30 days of pulse wave data and notifies users of possible abnormalities. Detection of sleep apnea has also been approved, allowing the device to catch breathing disorders with few obvious symptoms. When you consider that all of this can be worn on a single device around the clock, I think it is fair to say that, at least for people with chronic disease risk, a smartwatch is effectively necessary.
I think there is some exaggeration there. Many of these functions are screening aids, not diagnostic tools. And review articles have pointed out that their assessment of blood pressure or sleep is far from medical grade. Even Apple's hypertension alerts are merely reference information, meant to prompt proper cuff-based measurements. For stress and fatigue, there are large-scale studies where smartwatch indicators showed virtually no correlation with people's own perceived symptoms. Elevating such imperfect metrics to the status of essential infrastructure goes too far.
There is also significant value in terms of safety. The fall detection features on devices like the Apple Watch automatically sound an alarm when they detect a hard fall. And if there is no movement, they call emergency services and send your location. Falls in older adults are a major cause of fractures and long-term disability, and delays in discovery worsen outcomes. There are already reported cases in mountain and skiing accidents where SOS calls from a watch clearly prevented delays in rescue. For older people living alone and for outdoor enthusiasts, this is close to a must-have, akin to life insurance.
However, it is equally true that this fall and crash detection is far from perfect. Experiments and field tests have shown cases where the Apple Watch failed to detect softer falls, and conversely, cases where intense exercise or mosh pits at music festivals were misclassified as car crashes, causing a flood of false emergency calls. For older adults who truly have high fall risk, it makes more sense to prioritize more sensitive, dedicated monitoring devices or environmental fall prevention measures in the home. Relying on features that suffer both false positives and false negatives and calling them necessary strikes me as dangerous.
We should not overlook the value of aggregated data at the population level either. As of 2024, more than 500 million wearables have been shipped, and smartwatches alone have hundreds of millions of users. Using continuous data on heart rate, activity, and sleep, researchers are training AI models to detect structural heart problems and heart failure risk. There are even reports of accurately detecting structural heart disease from single-lead ECGs. This is information on a scale that conventional medical devices could never have provided, and it is becoming an indispensable foundation for preventative medicine and epidemiology.
But the fact that these devices are valuable as a research platform is different from saying individuals need to wear them. Those large-scale data sets also create unprecedented privacy risks. In a review that evaluated the privacy policies of 17 wearable manufacturers, many were rated high risk on items like transparency, third-party data sharing, and vulnerability disclosure, highlighting major disparities in data governance. Follow-up investigations have also found that many companies fail to clearly disclose how they share data with governments or other third parties. In this context, it is reckless to say people should wear these devices because it benefits everyone.
Of course, privacy is a serious concern, but that same review rated some companies, such as Apple and Google, as relatively lower risk, so users do have choices. You can tighten data sharing settings and restrict use to medical purposes only. Smartphones raise similar concerns, yet they are now regarded as almost indispensable. Smartwatches add a different dimension of health information, continuous ECG, sleep, and activity data to that platform, and I believe they are on their way to becoming equally important.
However, smartphones function as prerequisite infrastructure for social participation, covering communication, work, and administrative procedures, whereas smartwatches don't play that kind of role. Step counts and heart rate can be measured to some extent with a phone alone, and many health goals can be reached through regular checkups and lifestyle improvements. In fact, some people feel tied down by numbers and alerts because their wrist is constantly buzzing, which increases their psychological burden. There are studies linking wearable use to psychological stress and health anxiety, so it is hard to call them necessities for everyone.
On the other hand, for some professions and patient groups, the benefits are life-changing. A randomized controlled trial in 2025 reported that an intervention in which physicians used smartwatches to self-manage their sleep and activity significantly reduced burnout and improved resilience. Trials where inpatients wore wearables and received feedback on their activity levels also showed increases in physical activity and functional improvement. For patients with heart failure or diabetes, a device that can monitor weight, step count, and heart rate together is already very close to being part of the treatment itself.
I do not dispute that they can be medically necessary devices for specific professions or patients, but that is the same kind of necessity as dialysis machines or home oxygen equipment. Essential for some individuals, unnecessary for the general public. We do not say that every citizen should own a stethoscope just because doctors need one. Likewise, just because smartwatches help in managing certain diseases or occupational stress does not mean we should call them necessary for ordinary citizens.
When I say necessary, I don't mean an absolute condition for survival. I mean a foundation for autonomous health management in a super-aged society that needs to contain medical and nursing care burdens. In countries like Japan, where aging is advanced, it is unrealistic to expect physicians alone to monitor everyone's chronic disease risk. Systems in which individuals track their daily activity, heart rate, and sleep, and then connect to healthcare when something is off, will eventually be built into policy design. As the central tool in such systems, smartwatches are, in my view, becoming necessary infrastructure for society as a whole.
That argument does not adequately explain why it has to be a smartwatch. Activity and lifestyle records can be kept on a smartphone. And what clinicians need is high-quality data, not necessarily data that comes from the wrist. Moreover, if we design systems on the assumption that everyone has a wearable, people who cannot afford one or who cannot wear one for religious or cultural reasons will be disadvantaged. Once social systems start to assume the presence or absence of a particular gadget, calling that gadget necessary risks shifting costs and surveillance onto vulnerable groups.
The price barrier is gradually falling. Entry-level models that offer heart rate, sleep, and notification functions for several years of use are available for under a few tens of thousands of yen, and insurance schemes in which insurers subsidize device costs and discount premiums based on activity levels are spreading. Just as email and online banking have become standard assumptions, once health services are built around continuous data, situations will arise where people who don't have a device are at a disadvantage. In that sense, I think smartwatches will become increasingly practically necessary tools in the future.
Isn't creating a situation where people lose out if they don't have one itself a problem? Those with fewer financial resources are forced to choose cheaper devices, and, as we mentioned earlier, some of those manufacturers pose higher privacy risks. In addition, smartwatches contain lithium-ion batteries, and if they are not properly disposed of, they can leak harmful substances or cause fires at waste processing facilities. Recent studies have also reported high concentrations of PFAX, particularly PFHXA, leaching from fluororubber bands. Given these environmental and health burdens, it is hard to argue that smartwatches are a must-have item that should be widely disseminated.
Environmental impact and chemical risks are indeed serious issues, but I see them not as reasons to ban unnecessary technology, but as areas where regulation and better design should be used to reduce risk. PFAS exposure is concentrated in floral rubber bands, and some studies suggest that switching to silicone or fabric bands can lower exposure. Batteries can also be managed through proper recycling infrastructure and legal regulation. Instead of dismissing a technology with such extensive medical and behavioral science benefits as unnecessary because there are risks, isn't it more realistic to acknowledge its necessity and discuss how to use it safely?
Even acknowledging the benefits, I still conclude that while smartwatches are a powerful option, they are not a necessity in everyday life. Screening for atrial fibrillation and visualizing activity levels can be done by other means, and the smartwatch's unique advantages boil down to convenience and real-time feedback. At the same time, the side effects, privacy concerns, anxiety, and wasted medical resources caused by false alarms, and environmental impacts are far from negligible. As long as abundant alternative methods exist and people's freedom not to own one can be preserved, I see no compelling reason to abandon the stance that smartwatches are convenience but unnecessary.
This concludes our 10-round debate on whether smartwatches are truly necessary or just optional gadgets. For your own life, do you see a smartwatch as essential health infrastructure or as a convenient extra you can live without? Share your thoughts and real experiences with smartwatches in the comments.